You did everything right, researched for months, sat on it at the dealership, felt that jolt. This is it. For a few weeks, it was everything you imagined. Then it started sitting in the garage more than it used to. It didn't break. It isn't a bad motorcycle. Some of the bikes in this video are among the best ever built. So here's the question nobody asks before you buy. Why can the motorcycle you want most become the motorcycle you ride least? Start with this. A motorcycle can have a seat height under 27 inches, low enough that a shorter rider feels instantly confident in the parking lot, and still weigh more than 800 pounds fully fueled. Low seat, massive weight, both true at once. That's not the whole story, but it's the first clue. It tells us the specs a buyer notices first, the ones that create confidence at a standstill, aren't always the ones that predict how ownership actually feels. If that's true for seat height, what else are riders trusting that isn't telling them the full truth? Here's something almost every dream bike purchase has in common. It happens under perfect conditions. A dealership floor, a flat, open test ride loop, a 5-minute ride with nothing to carry, nowhere to be, no traffic. Under those conditions, nearly any motorcycle feels manageable. Real ownership doesn't happen under those conditions. It happens in a cramped driveway, on a slight incline, in a parking lot with 3 inches of clearance on either side. And that's exactly where a bike's true manageability shows up, not at speed, but at a standstill. Take a heavyweight touring bagger like Harley-Davidson's CVO Road Glides T. It has a genuinely low-laden seat height, around 26.7 inches, low enough that most riders can flat-foot it confidently. That number reads as easy to handle. But the bike weighs approximately 838 pounds in running order. Seat height tells you whether your feet reach the ground. It doesn't tell you what happens the moment the bike is barely moving, backing out of a spot by hand, catching it on a camber, walking it into a garage alone. At near zero speed, weight does almost all the work, and seat height goes quiet. Honda's Goldwing Tour makes the same point from the opposite direction. At approximately 845 pounds curb weight, it's heavier than the Harley, and yet many owners describe it as feeling composed, even light, once it's rolling. The chassis balances the weight, the engineering does its job, and the bulk disappears underneath you at speed. The catch is what at speed leaves out. Nearly all of that weight becomes relevant again the instant the bike stops, pushed into a garage, repositioned on a slope, caught before the side stand sinks into soft asphalt. The highway is where the Goldwing earns its reputation. The driveway is where that reputation gets tested. Same motorcycle, 2 completely different experiences depending on one variable. Is it moving or not? Picture the actual moment this shows up. Not a highway, not a canyon road, a gas station. The owner pulls in, tank empty, and the only open pump is at a slight angle, nose in, with another bike parked close on one side. Getting in was easy. The engine and momentum did the work. Getting back out means walking nearly 850 pounds backward uphill by hand with no speed to stabilize it. That's not a dramatic crash story. It's a small, recurring moment of tension that never shows up in a review. And it's exactly the kind of moment a 5-minute test ride was never going to include. That's the first deception in dream bike shopping. Evaluating a motorcycle almost entirely in its best moments, then living with it in its hardest ones. But weight is the easiest mismatch to see, because you can put a number on it. The more dangerous version of this problem hides inside a motorcycle riders describe with an entirely different word: focused. Not every mismatch is about carrying pounds. Some are about carrying expectations. Ducati's Panigale V4 isn't heavy or hard to hold up. Its mismatch is the opposite shape. It's a race-derived machine, engineered with extraordinary focus for conditions public roads almost never provide. Track-level lean angles, track-level revs, track-level braking loads. That focus is the whole point of the bike, and it's genuinely impressive. But every decision that makes the Panigale exceptional on a track pulls it slightly away from comfortable on a commute. A riding position built for cornering at 90 puts real weight on the wrists at 30 in traffic. Throttle response tuned for track precision can feel abrupt at low speed and stop-and-go conditions. None of that is a flaw. It's the cost of specialization, and the maintenance rhythm reflects the same priorities. Ducati specifies a 7,500-mile or 12-month service interval with a 15,000-mile valve check built into the plan. That's a completely reasonable ownership rhythm for a performance machine maintained like one. It only becomes a problem for an owner who expected the low-key service life of an ordinary street bike. Honda's CRF 450 RL shows the same trap from a different direction. It's a serious, competition-derived dual sport with genuinely excellent off-road capability and a maintenance schedule to match. Honda's own service interval calls for drive chain attention roughly every 300 miles or 3 months. For an owner expecting a low-effort commuter with dual sport looks, that arrives fast. A couple of weeks of normal riding, and the bike is already asking for attention. In both cases, the bike hasn't done anything wrong. It's simply continuing to ask for what a competition-bred machine has always required. The mismatch isn't mechanical, it's expectational, and that distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. A mechanical problem gets fixed at a shop. An expectational problem doesn't. It sits there, quietly, every time the owner glances at the bike and feels a small flicker of obligation instead of excitement. And that word, expectational, is where this story actually starts pointing somewhere new. Because if these mismatches aren't really about the bikes at all, then the next question isn't what's wrong with this motorcycle. Why do so many riders arrive with the wrong expectations in the first place? If you've ever bought something and immediately started rationalizing its downsides, you already know where this is going. Subscribe. We break down ownership decisions like this every week. Here's an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the expectation was never entirely the rider's mistake to begin with. Think about how a dream bike actually gets sold to you. The flagship trim gets the marketing budget and the prestige, like BMW's R1300 GS Adventure, which carries roughly 70 pounds more than the standard R1300 GS, 593 pounds versus 523 pounds fully fueled, in exchange for more range and greater expedition-oriented capability. Reviews tend to reward peak capability, because peak capability is what's exciting to write about. Marketing photography shows open roads, empty switchbacks, perfect light, never a three-point turn in a narrow driveway. And a 5-minute test ride can't reproduce 18 months of daily ownership, so it never gets the chance to reveal the friction that only shows up on ride 200, not ride 1. None of that is a conspiracy. It's just an industry built to sell peak moments, because peak moments are what get people excited enough to buy. And it isn't only marketing, it's the whole product ladder. Manufacturers build a base model, then a mid-tier, then a flagship, and the flagship is positioned, priced, and photographed as the real version of the bike, the one a serious rider is supposed to want. Dealerships steer conversations upward because a higher trim usually means a higher margin, not because it's the better fit for the rider standing in front of them. None of this requires bad intentions from anyone involved. It's simply what a sales environment optimized for excitement produces by default. The result is a rider who evaluates a motorcycle almost entirely on its best case capability, then owns it during its average case. The GS Adventure's extra 70 pounds is real capability. For a rider who's genuinely doing multi-day self-supported travel, it's invisible because it's working every single ride. For a rider doing mostly commuting and weekend rides, that same 70 pounds isn't paying for itself. It's just present in the parking lot, on soft ground, in every tight U-turn. So the mismatch isn't only psychological, it's structural. The whole buying environment, marketing, media, dealership incentives is optimized to show you a motorcycle's ceiling, not its Tuesday. And a rider who's never told to ask about the Tuesday has no real reason to ask about it themselves until they're already living it. Which raises the real question underneath everything so far. If riders are consistently sold the ceiling, what are they actually buying the motorcycle for? Sometimes the mismatch has nothing to do with weight, capability, or maintenance. Sometimes it's about who the rider was hoping to become. A retro-styled roadster sells on heritage and character, the way it looks, the era it evokes, the feeling of swinging a leg over something with real presence. That's a completely legitimate reason to buy a motorcycle. But style-first design can quietly compete with the practical demands of everyday or long-distance use, including wind protection, passenger comfort, and load capacity. None of that shows up in a parking lot. Nobody test rides a 6-hour trip. This is the purchase pattern hiding underneath almost every example in this video. Riders don't just buy a motorcycle, they buy a version of themselves. The tourer who crosses continents, the track rider who chases apexes every weekend, the adventurer stocked for anything. The motorcycle is real. The version of the rider it was bought for is sometimes imagined. And once money has changed hands, that imagined identity is hard to let go of. Admitting the bike doesn't fit can feel less like a practical realization and more like admitting the imagined version of yourself was wrong. And that's a much harder thing to sit with than a sore wrist or a tight parking lot. So instead of questioning the purchase, riders often question themselves. They assume they just need more practice, more strength, more time to adjust. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes what actually needs adjusting isn't the rider. It's the assumption that bought the bike in the first place, which is exactly why the mismatch usually doesn't get noticed at the moment of purchase. It gets noticed later in behavior. If part of this sounds a little too familiar, tell us in the comments which motorcycle taught you this lesson. We read every one, and some of the best stories on this channel started as a comment under a video, just like this one. Here's what all of this has been building toward. Every motorcycle has compromises. That was never the story. The story is what the owner does with them. Some riders adapt, build technique for a heavy bike's low-speed handling, adjust their riding style to a track-focused, ergonomic position, budget the time for a demanding service schedule because the payoff is worth it to them. Adaptation turns a compromise into a non-issue. Other riders don't adapt. They start avoiding the exact riding the bike was bought for. The heavy tourer stays parked because low-speed maneuvers feel stressful. The superbike only comes out a few times a season because the ergonomics wear thin in traffic. The dual sport gets ridden less as a maintenance rhythm starts to feel like a chore instead of a ritual. That's the actual tipping point, not inconvenience, not imperfection, avoidance. A motorcycle doesn't become wrong because it reveals a compromise. It becomes wrong when that compromise starts changing the owner's behavior, when it quietly makes them ride less instead of more. This is easy to miss because avoidance rarely announces itself. Nobody decides in one moment to stop riding a bike they saved up for. It happens gradually. A ride skipped because the weather's not quite right. A trip postponed because parking looks tight. A Saturday spent on chores instead. Each decision looks reasonable in isolation. It's only months later, looking at low mileage and a dusty seat, that the pattern becomes visible. By then, the owner usually blames themselves. Too busy, too tired, not riding enough. When the more accurate explanation is that the bike itself had quietly become something to plan around instead of something to reach for. One honest complication before we close this out: this isn't permanent and it isn't universal. A motorcycle that's wrong today may have been exactly right 2 years ago. An injury, a move, a change in storage or finances can turn a good match into a mismatch with no change to the bike at all. And a bike that's wrong as someone's only motorcycle can be exactly right as a second one, ridden rarely but ridden with real intention. A rider who owns a Panigale for 6 extraordinary rides a year, fully aware of the trade-off, hasn't made a mistake. That's not regret. That's an informed sacrifice. Regret is different. Regret is discovering the trade-off after the fact, not choosing it beforehand. So go back to the beginning. You did everything right. The research, the test ride, the saving. And the bike still ended up sitting in the garage more than you expected. Now you know why. Every motorcycle in this video is genuinely excellent at what it was built to do. That was never in question. What was in question is whether its ordinary compromises, the ones that show up on Ride 200, not Ride 1, Match the life you actually live, not the life a showroom lets you imagine for 5 minutes. So don't ask if it's a great motorcycle. Almost every dream bike is. That was never the part worth doubting. Ask this instead: does this motorcycle create the kind of riding you'll genuinely value? Or does it mostly create reasons not to ride? One question, asked honestly before you buy, does more for your ownership experience than any spec sheet ever will. Subscribe if you want more ownership truths like this one, because the best dream bike was never the one you think about most. It's the one that keeps giving you reasons to ride it.